So just what is Attorney General Charity Clark's job?
I don't think that the public wants their statewide elected prosecutor to handle those lower level crimes for a number of reasons. But more importantly, we prioritize the most violent crimes, and those aren't violent at all.
Lawmakers on the...
So it seems to me that Charity Clark just said a few days ago in a House committee, that prosecuting crimes, not so much her thing. But what we do know is that something that is very much her thing is working with other attorneys general in other blue states, trying to fight off DOJ, trying to represent the government of the state of Vermont and all of its money-making enterprises against some of the efforts that are happening from the Trump administration. Paul, what have you seen about this?
Well, it's almost like, to me, she says, I don't think that the people that elected me, or at least the people of Vermont, the voters, it's almost like she's saying, well, they didn't really elect me to take care of these, low-level cases. My job is to go after the president and make sure that, the $100 million in education financing or education funding from the federal government will still come here, or the $500 million for climate change mitigation funding. There's a lot of money on the table here that I think Democrats are really worried about. And, it almost seems more as if she serves as like a civil arm of the Democratic Party of the state, even, where she's, fighting to ensure that, that DOJ isn't just going to cut basically everything from our state government. I don't know. That's at least my take from what she's saying. Like, I think it's interesting that we have all these criminals in the state that just are not being prosecuted. Something like 23,000 open cases that the state's attorneys are having issues with. And I just pulled this up here. This is from Rob Roper today. He put something together great. And by the way, Kenny Gosselin and Zach Harvey are both on House Judiciary, and they've both raised this issue to me. So I just want to shout them out because I haven't had the time this last week to dive into this. So I'm so thankful that somebody did, Rob Roper. And just to talk a little bit about what Rob wrote here, basically what he's saying here is, while these requests don't entirely fall on deaf ears, Democrats on the House Judiciary Committee are prioritizing something called a pre-charge diversion program, which refers those who commit low-level crimes to community providers of restorative justice rather than court. And Rob, of course, jokes, well, that's one way to reduce the number of cases. Just don't charge people who commit crimes. That'll work. And I know, Guy, you made a comment earlier about this before we got started on the show, and I just want to know if you have anything to add on that.
Sure. The first thing is that we got a press release from Charity Clark this week saying, look at all of the lawsuits that I'm involved in, fighting against the Trump administration. And then called a press conference in Burlington for 11 a.m. on Thursday morning. And I said, terrific. We'll send our reporter, Mike Bolosky, down there. Mike gets down there, and it's basically the way, frankly, most state office buildings are right now, which is kind of empty. One of the entrances was actually chained shut, so you couldn't get into it. But Mike, being the persistent reporter that he is, got in, asked around, and basically found out, oh, we canceled that press conference. Sorry you didn't know. And so one of the questions we were going to ask is, how often are you on the phone with the other attorneys general, these 20 to 22 other Democrat attorneys general? Because I have heard that it may be like, once a day, she has a regular conference call with them saying, okay, how are we going to stick it to the Trump administration? And Governor Scott made a really good point at the press conference. He said, the states came before the federal government did. That, not in Vermont's case, but in Massachusetts and New York and Pennsylvania, these entities were long before the United States of America were founded. and he said he believes in states' rights. On the other hand, you have these, it seems to me that there's this constant pushback, not only against Trump and Doge and all that, but also what are they trying to get? What's she really trying to do? Is she trying to protect the citizens, or is she trying to protect government programs? For example, she is all about suing the oil companies, et cetera, on climate change stuff. Well, who really benefits from these climate change programs? Is it us? Or is it the renewable power industry in Vermont? Well, I would say kind of, yeah.
I mean, if I could just say something real quick, Guy, it's almost like she's arguing on behalf of the job security of, nonprofit organizations, bureaucrats, and climate hawks.
Right.
Is that a fair justification?
And also, when you go to the education cuts, to all of the, not necessarily the math and English teachers, but all of this huge pack of DEI instructors and special aides and administrators who are basically, because the feds and others have said we must have DEI and other programs, they have really good jobs. Well, actually, they might be losing those jobs.
That's right.
if this all takes effect. And the more I think about it, Paul, I'm looking at what has every president been promising since, well, at least since Reagan, which is we need to balance the budget. I've lived through all of these elections,
Yeah.
and they all say, especially the Republicans, but sometimes the Democrats, we've got to balance the budget. And then never, and never, including Trump's first term.
That's right.
He did not, this was not one of his great strong points in his first term.
No, it's not.
But he decided, I'm going to get serious about this, and I'm going to cut. And he got someone who has zero empathy in this world. He is not crippled by empathy, which I think is exactly how Elon Musk himself put it.
Yeah.
And who is going to say, I'm going to look at the numbers and I'm going to propose cuts.
Yeah.
And my heart will not be twisted by sob stories of well-paid federal folks.
Yeah.
But then I got to say, Paul, too, these are real people.
Yes, of course.
And do you know?
Yeah,
folks?
well, we were talking a little bit about this. I just want to say quickly, a handful of very close people to me are being affected by this whole situation in ways that I didn't really foresee. And I won't get too deep into the details of it, but like I had one family member who never would have said this to me recently say, if Donald Trump balances the budget, he redeems himself in my eyes for everything that I thought was wrong with him.
Wow.
Because that would prove that a lot of the stuff that they've said about him is just not true. Because the budget itself affects all of us, right? I mean, even Phil Scott and a lot of these fiscally conservative Republicans or conservatives, I think a lot of them would feel the same way. At the end of the day, like we're all affected by this inflated budget in Washington, D.C. And yeah, people are going to be affected by that. I do have a family member that may or may not be losing their job. They're not really sure yet, but they are somebody who works for a nonprofit, and
A federally funded nonprofit?
I believe federally funded
Okay.
nonprofit,
Yeah.
and this person's definitely not excited about it, but she's one of many right now. And when I have spoken to her recently, or other family members, there's been people that have said everybody in Washington D.C. is looking for a job right now. Everybody, and it's not even there's people that have had jobs that are saying, all right, things are changing. Where am I going to be? Where am I going? How are things going to get shifted? So there's a lot happening down there, and I think we're all being affected by this presidency. And I think for to Governor Scott's point about states' rights, I think for a lot of time people have said they love this idea that we're like maybe not affected by the federal government, or that like we're just up here in the hills and nobody sees us and it doesn't really matter, right? I agree. I believe in states' rights as well, but I also believe in the federal government's right to say, okay, we're not going to pay for your state's programs that are not helping anybody or anything, right? And that's me just saying that. But
Well, questionable effectiveness sometimes.
I'm sorry.
Very questionable effectiveness to these programs.
Exactly. And that's not to say that there's not people in Vermont doing good work, because of course there are, you know. But we definitely need to. I mean, we're beating a dead horse with this, but the reality is like there's cuts coming, and we're all going to feel the effects of this, as well as trade war. So, and maybe I mean, I don't know if we're quite ready to get into that part of the conversation. I know we have a few things still we want to discuss, but you know, the really what you're seeing though is, I think what's happening is much larger than you know, Charity Clark suing the president and the attorneys generals, right? I mean, it's almost like there's an entire political apparatus that is at threat here, right?
Oh, and she's their lawyer.
Well,
You might say she's the mob lawyer.
She
you know,
is
right?
she is their lawyer, and so are all these other attorneys generals around the
Right.
country, right?
Okay.
And you know, I actually don't know the exact list, but if you said there's 28 states,
20 to 22.
okay, so I'd be curious to know which ones they were, just simply because, you know, you could probably start to dive into the finances of each one of these states, right? And which
They're all blue states.
Yeah,
all
of course.
Democrats. Yeah,
Of course.
and I'm sure they all have a lot of federal climate money and education money and everything like that tied into it. So we're also seeing, Paul, we're seeing a lot of pushback from the political arm here on this, including some that you have some extremely firsthand knowledge of. And I would like to first go to a commercial break.
Sure.
And then maybe we can talk about how to comment and all that stuff, and then get into what's the Democratic Party doing to push back on this?
Sure. So our episode today is brought to you by Procter Gas, the propane people. Are you a homeowner wishing to convert your home to propane gas so you can enjoy energy efficiency and off-grid living? Alternatively, you may be a contractor seeking propane tank and line installation related services for your clients. Either way, our propane company is here to help. We provide comprehensive services and a variety of products from leading brands in Rutland, Vermont, and beyond. Procter Gas is based right in Procter, right? If I'm not
That's right.
mistaken. They're one of our first sponsors.
I think they were our very first.
They might be our first, yeah. And we're really thankful to have sponsors, Guy. I mean, I you know, we think back to a year ago, we're doing this. Now we have multiple sponsors.
Yeah. And
so-
by the way, folks, just had an email from another potential very major sponsor. We're very excited about it. Can't say who it is yet because it's not written in stone, but my guess is by next week we'll be able to tell you who that is.
Do I know who it is?
I think you do, Paul.
Okay.
I think you do.
Okay, I think I do too then. Well, cool. But we just, and Judy writes in, thanks, Paul. Thank you. Thank you very much.
She's watching. She's
and
watching.
It's so great that you're watching, and we mentioned it. So thanks for tuning in. And that is what makes it all about, right? I mean, to have you out there watching too is just as encouraging. So.
It is.
And I do just want to say a quick note, as we always do, guys. If there's any tech issues, any sound issues, feel free to let us know. We do have a couple comments. Judy also wrote, I came home early just to watch you guys. So thanks. Thank you very much. Puffin writes, Charity Clark needs to taper back the left-wing performative activism and spend more time and resources helping build an improved quality of life for everyday people. And I think that's pretty well said, Guy, wouldn't you?
I would too. And I think that what are people in Vermont mostly concerned about? Well, they don't want to be scammed.
Yes.
I had a senior citizen friend of mine call me today, and he was half laughing, but I think he was maybe half serious. He said, oh, I got a call from someone who said all I need to do is do a $300 Amazon gift card, and then he would drive up and give me a brand new silver Mercedes because I won a raffle. And he was laughing at it, but I think he was actually checking in with me because part of him wondered if it was real. He's in his probably mid-70s or so, and I think he was sort of wondering. So scams. I got to say, Charity Clark does a pretty good job with the whole scam thing. But there's just, there's real life crime. And if these things need to be fought, if the Doge stuff, et cetera, needs to be fought, it seems to me there are a million nonprofits who are very capable of bringing lawsuits into federal district court on this, working together. They have standing. They can at least do most of the real heavy lifting for the states, I would imagine. I mean, why does she have to have her attorneys doing the heavy lifting on this stuff when others could certainly do that, and she could focus on what's affecting real crime in Vermont?
Well, let's just go back to this part of the story. This is from Rob's story. The state's attorney also asked for help from the Attorney General's office in picking up more of the load than the 78 cases out of 23,124 they are currently prosecuting. And then this is Rob's commentary, just to be clear. Okay. Nope, AG Clark, in honor of an hour of testimony, made it clear she is too busy suing the Trump administration to do anything about maintaining public safety in our state. Suggestion to legislators: pass a law compelling her office to do more to reduce crime in Vermont. The more I'm kind of reading through this, I don't really know. I mean, I have an idea of what the Attorney General's job is, but I think we're kind of trying to figure that out.
Well, it is all of these things that we've mentioned. It's like the Secretary of State's office. They have about 10 different areas. But the question is, if she's spending all of her time suing Doge or something, she's said in that to the committee, frankly, we don't have enough time. We're all stretched very thin here.
Yeah.
Well, if you don't have time to prosecute Vermont crooks, then maybe you should be spending a little less time on some of the political stuff.
Yeah.
Maybe that's all we're really trying to say.
Yeah, and really too, going forward, I don't know what's in store for the Vermont Democratic Party or the Democratic Party as a whole. Yeah. But I mean, look, you don't have to operate in this way, I guess. There are other ways to be the Attorney General or to be somebody who's engaged in Vermont politics as a Democrat. I'm just saying this as a general point. Like, I know things have been a certain way for a really long time, and it's scary to think that these institutions that we've kind of relied on or put faith in are not going to exist anymore, right? Or even some of the nonprofits that have been funded. But we don't have
businesses come and go, Paul.
Yeah, businesses come and go. Things change. And
so can government programs. So can nonprofits.
Yeah, and we are all just forced to respond to that. And instead of I feel like what I'm seeing a lot of, to defend her too, in one sense, by the way. Look, when JD Vance was here and I'm covering all this stuff,
right?
It's infatuating. Like, it's so, like, it is so, what's the word I'm looking for? It just takes over your entire being, right, covering this interesting national thing where it's like, the biggest office in the world, right, is coming to your life. So I can understand why she's engaging in the political arena in this way. Sure. But I guess what I'm trying to say is I just don't think it's going to work out for her, and I don't think it's going to work out for Vermonters very well either.
Speaking of which, there was a group that I just found out the name of this week called Indivisible.
Yeah.
And what can you tell us about them? And actually Jimmy Dore tells it pretty well.
Yeah. So I'll just say quickly,
in your own experience.
Yeah, so, from my own experience, of course, there's a lot of people that turned out to protest last weekend at Sugarbush and in Waitsfield, Vermont, for J.D. Vance's visit to go skiing at Sugarbush. And, I think there's always part of me that wonders just how authentic a lot of these protests are, even at the State House. You always get these large groups to turn out. It's almost like the nonprofits just have like an email chain that they all send out or something.
Yeah, they do.
It's almost like
and they're not all Vermonters either.
Yeah, they're not, and a lot of these protesters were not either. Which, hey, they're protesting the vice.
Yeah, I saw a sticker that said, "Not welcome in my state," on the back of a car, and then it was from a Rhode Island car.
Yeah. Yeah.
Huh, well, okay. He's not welcome in Rhode Island. That's good to know.
Well, good thing we're in Vermont. But
Yeah.
yeah, I think there's a clip that was kind of going around, and I want to share it with you guys. It's so funny, very entertaining. Jimmy Dore on his show, he's a comedian and kind of a more recently become a political commentary guy. He was kind of like a real lefty back in the day, you know,
Kind
lefty.
of a Bill Maher type. That's the way I think of him.
Yeah, very similar.
Yeah.
But here he is kind of just clowning around. So let me pull this up for you.
Erupt across U.S. after really they erupted. Protest did not erupt. It was more like a wet fart. That protests against the Trump administration erupted across the U.S. on Saturday following an unprecedented Oval Office clash where Donathanahans and J.D. Vance escalated tensions with Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky. Hundreds of protesters gathered in Waitsfield, Vermont. What? On Saturday morning to oppose the vice president's visit to the state for a ski trip with his family. Oh, that ought to do it. Are you kidding me? You're kidding me. They're protesting J.D. Vance going on a ski trip. The demonstration had been planned earlier in the week by the Mad River Valley chapter of Indivisible. Oh, so they're just horrible Democrats. So that's all this is. A grassroots organization group. I bet they're taking dark money. But additional protesters said they were motivated to join after watching Vance and Trump's combative White House meeting with Zelensky on Friday. By grassroots, they mean founded by congressional staffers with dark money. I think that's what they mean by grassroots. Protesters held signs reading, "Vermont stands with Ukraine." Really? Why don't you go enlist? An international embarrassment, while many waved Ukrainian flags in solidarity, showing you just how well corporate pro-war propaganda works. Fox aired video of the protesters, but blurred out signs displaying messages against Vance and in favor of Ukraine. After what he did yesterday, he crossed the line, protester Corey Giroux told Vermont Public Radio. Pro-Ukrainian protests erupt.
Back to you, guy.
So we have a picture there of, he mentioned some Senate staffers. Oh, this must be put together by Senate staffers. And we actually, well, we don't have it. It's on the Indivisible website for the Mad River chapter of a bunch of Indivisible members meeting with Peter Welch's staffer, Ryan McLaren, in his Vermont state office.
And that's Ryan on the That's Ryan on the far right, just so everybody knows.
Very good.
That's Peter Welch's staff.
So we're not necessarily saying that Ryan McLaren is, directed this whole thing. I'm not saying that. No. But it does show, and the website in other parts shows the real link between the Democrat Party and this Indivisible. For one thing, it says that if you want to financially support Indivisible, which by the way is a national organization, this is just one Vermont chapter. They have chapters all over the place. If you want to support them, go to ActBlue.
That's right.
.com, which is the fundraising online arm of the Democratic Party. Or should say, perhaps the Democrat Party. All right? So I'm assuming then if you give to them, they are getting some of that money.
Yep.
From ActBlue. So this is sort of like the grassroots. Who knows who's really running the show or whatever, but you have a lot of people turning out, and some of those folks, I mean, tell me about some of the experiences you saw, Paul, during the weekend there.
I guess I haven't really had an opportunity yet to do this on our show. I did, I was there last weekend at Sugarbush, and if you read my story, thank you. It was really fun to write. Man, did we have an interesting weekend over there. Yeah, I mean, I was called names for wearing this hat. And look, I'm not a victim, right? I knew 100% what I was doing wearing this hat.
You're not a victim?
No, I'm not a victim. I'm not going to be like, oh, it's so terrible how they treated me, I knew that was what's going to happen, right? Like, let's be honest. That's part of the, if you're going to do that, right? So I did, and I wore the hat, and my goal, of course, was I was hoping to see the vice president, or maybe he would see me ripping it up under the...
Can't take the crap, don't wear the cap.
Exactly. And you know what? If he can, this is my thought on it, why I really did do it, is if he can come here and come, on vacation, like he said, and he can just see everybody and deal with it and just kind of rise above it all, I can wear a hat and get called a Nazi and a traitor to Russia at the same time. There's so many different names thrown around that they
You did travel to Europe once, Paul.
I did. I've been there a couple times, yeah. but they're just very, very nasty, and that's kind of like another example of this. I mean, even yesterday, I was on the chairlift just riding up with just some inconspicuous guy, and this is, of course, days after, and I kind of started chatting with him, and I was curious and he was from Philadelphia. I was curious to know his thoughts on it, and then just like out of nowhere, he just breaks into this like hatred of Donald Trump and JD Vance and saying that he's a human piece of, and all these, and I'm just thinking like, here I was having a totally normal conversation with a guy, and then all of a sudden like this nasty person comes out and they think it's totally okay. I'm gonna be very, very honest with you, Guy. What's happening right now with a lot of people on the left and the reaction, very much it reminds me of COVID times. So like during COVID, people felt very empowered to shame you for not wearing a mask, or very empowered to tell you basically that you're a piece of human garbage for not wanting to take the vaccine, or it almost seems to me similar to the mass formation that we saw of just fear, right? Like these people are so full of fear, they're afraid,
right,
that they're reacting similar in ways to they did in COVID, where it just completely the fear just completely overrides their ability to think, right? So like they're then just empowered to be just like almost violent even. Like, I mean, there was one conversation I had with a guy who I really was afraid getting off the chair that he might try to do something and I was gonna have to fight this guy, and I'm thinking like, all because I'm wearing a hat, he's this upset. And that to me says that there is almost like a whole world of sleeper cell agents out there that have been completely brainwashed into being hateful, and to the point where like, they don't care. I almost, one of our most viral video ever, which now has 800,000 views on Facebook.
Whoa.
Yeah, which is the video of the motorcade going through downtown Waitsfield. A lot of the comments are people saying things like, "Oh, Doge, what about waste? Talk about waste with Doge, blah, blah, blah. Here's, and it's like, guys, this is the vice president of the United States. There's a reason why he has all this security, right? Mm-hmm. These protesters showed you very darn well why they have all this security. They are worried about people out there that would love the opportunity to take their shot. And I don't mean maybe a shot, but some way or another get their chance to embarrass the vice president, or get their message heard, or whatever. So I don't know. I just think it's also interesting to me too that all of a sudden they care about government spending when the vice president is using the motorcade. Oh, now you guys care about government spending. Oh, wow. It's just, it's interesting stuff.
Yeah. Wow.
But we do have a couple comments, Guy.
Sure.
If we want to. The issue with JD Vance was the businesses who accepted payment and also organized against their guests. So basically, this includes Sugarbush, where they were permitted protests on the slopes against their paying guests, and the Pitcher Inn, where they welcomed the disruptors with a promise of fresh coffee to harass their guest and family. And the most egregious, the Valley Reporter, actually community organizers under the guise of journalism. That's a really, really good point. I'm not gonna look. I've wondered this as well, and my mind started ticking through all of this. Like, okay, Valley Reporter, what businesses, and I don't want to. I love the Mad River Valley, right? But
so the Valley Reporter is the long-running weekly community newspaper for the Mad River Valley.
Yeah.
Yeah, and generally they report on what's happening in the schools, and should we buy another fire truck, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. They're a good, solid community newspaper.
That's right.
But you're saying in this case there may have been some.
Well, it's I don't know, right? But definitely there's a point to be made. I mean, you could look into it. I don't know their affiliation, if there is any, with Indivisible, right? But they were really, look. Let's just say this. They posted on Facebook. This is how it went for me. They posted on Facebook, J.D. Vance is coming to Vermont. Somebody called me and told me about it. I went and looked at their Facebook page. This was within 5 minutes of them posting that.
Yeah.
And I called and asked, is this true? She said, hold on 1 second. Yes, it's true. And I said, can I speak to the reporter? They wouldn't let me speak to them. That was the confirmation.
Yeah.
So.
Okay. Well, I don't really fault them for reporting that the vice president's coming
Me
to
neither.
their town.
Me
I mean,
neither.
we did that. We went, whoa! We
Yeah,
jumped all over it.
of course.
However, if there was sort of a I guess you might say, an anti-Vance slant to this, to me, this is endemic of a real huge problem in our Vermont and U.S. media. Kevin Ellis, former VT Digger board member, former Free Press journalist, wrote a column this morning shaking his head saying, I can't believe that our good, strong U.S. media is rolling over and kissing the boots of Donald Trump. like before, I guess they were really fair, accurate, and balanced.
Yeah.
Which, no, they weren't. No, they weren't.
Yeah.
And yet there was this pretense that we're playing it right down the middle, folks, just the facts. And we got so much crap on the Chronicle's comments page for you wearing that hat.
Oh, I
Paul.
know.
And you know what? And people saying, what kind of serious journalist is this if he's wearing a Make America Great hat? And I would say he's the kind of serious journalist who tells you what his bias is.
I don't pretend.
He's upfront about his bias. As opposed to a good 70, 80, 90% who do have a bias. It's reflected in their work. Hey, it's okay if they have a personal bias. But as they say, if you have amorous feelings towards elephants, that's all right. Just don't cover the circus. So you're not supposed to let it show at least too much. And if you do, be upfront about your bias.
Here's what I'll say in response to that too, Guy. I noticed, I don't think it was too bad. There was a number of people saying it. But A, I expected that, right?
Yeah.
And B, I mean, I also had a lot of people tell me that my writing otherwise, if it has nothing to do with this stuff, you can't tell the
Good.
bias.
Yeah.
And I think that comes out in anything I write about the energy stories or really what's happening in the state. I mean, look, I think it's way better to be honest and upfront about where your views are coming from and be wrong if you're wrong, right? And then people can point to say, hey, remember Paul Bean used to have these views about this person and this is how it changed over time? I'd rather be on the record like that.
Right.
You know, because if J.D. Vance does go off the rails, let's say, which I don't know, he seems to be pretty on par, right? I mean, at least in the political world, that guy is pretty legit,
He's
right?
pretty squared away.
Pretty squared away. But like, let's say he does go off the rails. Yeah, I'm gonna not support him, you know.
Yeah.
But
And we will report accordingly.
exactly.
That's the thing.
But they're not. That's where I think I'm so. I mean, I'm actually pleased to kind of be in the position that we're in because I actually do believe in the things that they're trying to accomplish. Do I love every little intricacy about J.D. Vance
Right.
or the presidential administration? No, I don't, and I have some pretty serious concerns. But I think they do too, right? Obviously, and humans are just humans, and there's always going to be mistakes and things that happen that people didn't expect to happen. But at the end of the day, you know, I'd rather be part of a bigger solution, right? A big solution, as opposed to somebody who's just like, you know, supreme full-time complainer, you know, or critic,
Right.
or hater. You know, I mean, I see a lot of hate. I'll tell you what, I saw so much hate this last week. I've never seen so much hate in my life, and I can stand by that.
Wow.
You know,
That's too bad.
it was pretty eye-opening, Guy.
So before we get into our next segment, which we'll be talking about tariffs and what this is going to mean to Vermont, Paul, why don't you bring us another commercial?
Today's episode is also brought to you by Ranmar Corporation. Ranmar Corporation has been serving central Vermont and surrounding areas with excavation, construction, and real estate services since 1979. They're a local, family-owned company committed to the values of Vermont. Contact Ranmar Corporation today for all of your contracting and real estate needs. Based right here in Berlin, we're just a few miles away from their headquarters. If you're somebody who's tuning in and you're thinking, man, I have a piece of property I want to develop this year, or I have I want to put a double wide on this space right here, man, contact Ranmar Corporation. Those are your guys, and they're our second longest running sponsor, if I'm not mistaken. So shout out to them. Thanks for support. And with that guy, I do have another comment here. Let's see here. This is from Judy Taranovich. She says, a serious journal who, call me crazy, wants America to be great again. Never let the hard days win, gentlemen. That's right. I love that. I love that. And to her point, never let the hard days win. One of my favorite things Trump said during his speech last week, the State of the Union, was we're going back, and America's going back to common sense, and we're never going back. We're never looking back from common sense. And I really liked that part of what he had to say, because it almost does feel like in many ways that we did abandon it really for about 4 years.
Yes.
And it kind of does feel like America is back to a certain degree. What do you think, Guy?
I think the folks in charge, and boy are they ever in charge, are showing the common sense.
Yeah.
And that's the reason why, for example, more people are enlisting now. They're finally hitting their enlistment targets in the military, is because the military has not become this sort of depository of DEI indoctrination and being involved in very questionable wars. Instead, it's a place where we can be proud of America and know that if we are going to fight, we're going to be fighting for America and not for some sort of weird industry or globalism or something like that. Yeah. It's going to be the real deal.
To that point, man, Guy, do we have contacts all over the world? I have a brother in England who is in the Air Force, and having his insight too with everything that's going on right now with Ukraine, potential trade war, all this different stuff. But even he's saying, it might look like externally, being in the United States, like England isn't excited about the Trump presidency, and maybe Europe as a whole isn't. But the truth is there's a lot of people over there that are really excited about a Trump presidency,
Sure.
and the military especially is. I think people are just enamored by what's happened in the last 2 months or whatever since January 20th.
Yep.
With Pete Hegseth, and just I don't think people quite understand, like, just optics-wise, how important it is to have a projection of strength and positivity and goodwill. And I think that people are seeing that from their leaders. And my brother, God bless him, he's over there, and you read about stuff that's going on. And I saw Sturmer was saying something about maybe British troops being in the Ukraine, and and aircraft support. And the United States has a huge presence over there. NATO is massive force, and we fund a lot of that. So I know we're not really looking to get too deep into that topic today, but there is a point to be made there, and we'll have to talk maybe further about that in the future.
That'd be great.
Sure.
So one of the real world things, though, Vermont's running into right now is tariffs. And what are these tariffs going to mean? It's sort of hard. Paul, you and I were talking about this earlier today. It's almost impossible to really talk about this because it seems to change every couple of hours about, what are we talking about here with tariffs? It seems clear that the president is pursuing I will tariff you unless you tighten up the border, unless we control the fentanyl. And as that has been happening, he's been backing off a little bit. So it is a little hard to say exactly where this is all going to go. But for example, at the governor's press conference yesterday, our Secretary of Agriculture, Anson Tebbets, got on the Zoom call and said he had just talked with someone up in Morrison Feeds up in Orleans County. And they had come back from Canada with a load of soy feed that they sell to farmers that cost an extra, I think the number was $5,000. An extra $5,000. They came back with a big truckload of corn. It cost an extra corn feed an extra $2,000. And that, of course, is going to be passed on to our farmers who are already suffering. So we're seeing an immediate impact in that way. I gassed up yesterday at 304 or 307 or a couple days ago, and prices were up. My wife bought gas at 324 a day and a half later. So we're definitely seeing an upward push in gasoline prices. And of course, we get our gasoline from Canada. So that's one way or another that's reflected in either anticipation of tariffs or in the actual tariffs. So, but one of the unexpected, possibly game-changing outcomes of all of this is, folks, you're not going to believe this unless you read about it in the Chronicle today, but some Vermont Democrats are pushing a bill to look at nuclear power in Vermont. They want to look at getting nuclear power back in Vermont. It's 3 Democrats, 8 Republicans. One of them is our friend Jay Hooper, but there's a couple others who are older, very sort of traditional Democrats who are the last people I would ever think of as being supporting this. And so I looked into it, and what they're talking about is what they call small nuclear, which is modules that each make about 50 megawatts. You put 12 of them together, you have 600 megawatts, which is basically about the same output as what Vermont Yankee did. It's safe, it's clean, and I'm sure it's also expensive. But it is, importantly, it's a design that was approved by the Biden administration. The Biden administration said, yes, we think this is a good design, which basically that frees up Democrat representatives to say, okay, this is a good thing. So we have they have this, basically it's a committee looking into, would this work for Vermont? But that is the first time that's happened since Vermont Yankee in the mid-60s, then Senator Tom Salmon, soon to be Governor Tom Salmon, and some other people working together across the aisle, again, a bipartisan thing, to say, you know what, I think we need a nuclear power plant in Vermont, and that's how Vermont Yankee got started. So it may be that history 60 years later is repeating itself. I don't know. Another thing, and this is absolutely connected to the tariffs, to the threat of tariffs. As you may, again, have read in yesterday's Chronicle, the premiers of Quebec and Ontario have threatened to cut off electricity. If this trade war gets bad enough, if it gets nasty enough, one of the things on the table is cut it off. No more power to Vermont. We're the only state with a big contract for them. And it supplies about 20% or so of our power, 25% of our power. And one possibility is you're cut off. We get a lot of natural gas. Natural gas is used to make electricity, okay, from Canada. So you have Carrick Johnson, who's the Commissioner of Public Service. I think I might have called him Public Safety today in today's Chronicle. Sorry, Carrick. It's Public Service. He's the energy czar, you might say, for Vermont. He got together with the other state energy czars for New England, and they agreed that, you know what, we've got to kind of take another look at nuclear here. We've got to reprioritize nuclear because we may not have this hydropower from Quebec, or it may be a lot more expensive. We can't rely on it. We've got 3 nuclear reactors, Seabrook in New Hampshire, 2 Millstone reactors in Connecticut, and it's time for us, and maybe some of this new nuclear as well, it's time for us to take a serious look at nuclear. And one of the reasons, of course, is that we've got these carbon goals.
Oh, yeah.
And if you want, and every state's got them to some degree or another. So if you want to meet your low carbon goals, you may just have to bite the bullet and go with carbon-free nuclear power, because you can't make enough with wind and solar, especially because the offshore wind, even before Trump was elected, Massachusetts and other New England states' offshore wind was really, shall I say, sucking wind. It was becoming incredibly expensive. There are a lot of environmental challenges. The reality of offshore wind just wasn't panning out. So if you can't make a gazillion megawatts that way, then how are you going to do? Oh, and by the way, do you know where those are all made, Paul?
China.
Oh, yes, indeed. I've been listening to Tom Cotton's book, 7 Things You Can't Say About China. And one of them is that they have absolutely cornered the market on not only wind turbines, but also solar panels. So if we want to have a huge build out of wind and solar, we will be saying to our biggest competitor, to a competitor that economically wants to take over the world, and I say this because there's a fellow in Rutland who was a former reporter for a business magazine in China, a international business magazine, who said very flatly, yeah, their goal is to rule the world, economically anyway, is to rule the world. So if we don't want to basically be putting our entire energy future into the hands of the Chinese, gosh, it makes an awful lot of sense to develop our own power.
Well, and that's I think the beauty of what this is all proving about what Trump's trying to do.
Yes.
You know, and I think just as an example, I mentioned to you on the phone earlier today is next year Honda is going to start making all of their Civics in the United States, whereas they've been made in Mexico for the last few generations of the vehicle anyway. So, you know, look, eggs are going to be more expensive, right? That's something else. Well, guess what? I might have to buy some chickens this summer and start selling eggs. You know, I think we really got to figure out how to
Creamies and eggs?
Creamies and eggs. Why not? And I mean, I'm not even. I'm kind of half serious about it because look, we got to respond to this.
You got that big yard and back of beans.
There's plenty.
Good heavens!
Plenty. I could have a chicken farm. I know.
I'll invest.
Let's think about it for real. I'm really not kidding around. Anybody watching out there, you know, let me know what you think. But look, we got to figure out a way to respond. We can't just be, well, this is how, and this is Vermont, right? Oh, well, this is how things have always been this way. What do you mean? Well, not anymore. Right. Things are changing, and we got to respond to that, and accept it. Otherwise, you know, we are going to get left behind. And I do have a comment from Judy who writes, and this is a great comment, Guy. She says, oh, I'm sorry, everybody. Definitely having a few sleepless nights over the tariffs. There is a law on the books in Vermont, CF 111. This line requires propane dealers to notify their customers 60 days prior to any line item. Once the tariff goes into place, it's 60 days before I can start charging that additional fee that it'll cost me. By the time I get in place to recoup my money to tariffs, the tariffs may be gone again. So basically, what she's saying is if we do end up going through this, she's just going to have to pay the price, and there's nothing she can do about it.
I hope that the Scott administration and the legislature will grant some sort of waiver for that.
Yeah.
Because those laws were not made with that sort of situation in mind.
No, and she also adds that there is a press conference / kind of rally going on next week. Yeah. It is a rally.
Yeah. On
Wednesday, 3/12, noon, on the Clean Heat Standard, put on by Rob Roper. There's going to be a handful of other kind of community activists.
Probably Allison Despathy.
Allison Despathy will definitely be there.
Yeah. Americans for Prosperity might be there.
That's right. I'm pretty sure John Rogers will be there as well.
Yeah.
So, you know, I think that there's a lot of Vermonters that are paying attention to this energy issue. And I mean, look, everything's being shaken up right now in such a way. It's profound, honestly. Yep. We're going back and asking questions and fleshing out ideas that, you know, as you've said, have basically been ignored for the last 10, 15 years. I mean, it still says on that train trestle going into Northfield, from Northfield into Montpelier, close VT Yankee.
Right.
You know, and that's been there since I was probably a little kid.
Right.
You know, so And I always wondered about that. What is all that? You know,
Like 5 years ago? Is that what
well,
you're
yeah, kind of 5 years. What did that mean? Why did that happen? And
Right.
it didn't really make much of it, but it almost is like this whole kind of like American independence and abundance of resources, like everything that the Trump administration has been trying to bring out. It's
Right.
like, wait a minute, like we aren't dependent. We should not be dependent on Canada for everything. I know we're not dependent on them for everything, but a lot. And power, I mean, that's a huge part of it.
Sure. I mean, we talked a couple weeks ago about the biggest natural gas field in the world is the Marcellus shale field in Pennsylvania and New York. What's stopping us from getting a piece of that? Well, the states who really love their renewable power won't let a pipeline be built. That's why. So get over it, build a pipeline, and we can have like an unending supply of really low-cost power. So why not?
So, Guy, I'm going to go to an ad here.
Please.
Today's episode is also brought to you by One Day in July. Investment management, always fiduciaries. As financial advisors, One Day in July provides personalized investment management and financial advice to individuals, families, and institutions. They work with clients to understand their financial goals and build investment solutions. They are fiduciaries on all accounts for all clients. And I say this every time, but they're based up in Burlington, and they have an office down in Bennington as well, and offices really all over the place. Yeah.
Yes.
So, but they're based here in Vermont, and it's, again, we're always so honored to have our sponsors and be able to talk a little bit about them. And Dan Cunningham is definitely a supporter of the Chronicle, so definitely want to shout him out as well.
In retrospect, I'm not positive they have an office in Bennington. They may. I do know that's where Dan's from.
Okay.
Right. He went to, I think, to Mount Anthony and, right. So speaking of Burlington, at town meeting this Tuesday, one of the things that happened was that the voters of Burlington overwhelmingly banned carrying guns in bars because there's been some gunfire and some killings, at least one killing, within the last year or so outside of a bar. And the voters said, okay, we don't want any guns in bars. And now that would have to be eventually go to the legislature because that's an ordinance change. And it's a real question with the Supreme Court ruling on carrying guns, whether they can actually say, oh no, you can't carry a gun in here. And you know, I don't know. I certainly don't want to be around a lot of drunk people who are shooting off guns all the time, but then maybe I don't have to go into that bar. But also, it does, sober, smart people with guns can sometimes be a deterrent as well.
Yeah.
So I have a feeling if that thing ever comes up, another one of our Chronicle sponsors, the Vermont Federation of Sportsmen's Clubs, they might have something to say about that.
Yeah, well, and I'm pretty sure, I mean, this is a Second Amendment, it's a federal law.
Yeah.
And I don't think that they can really ban. I'm not well enough versed on this, but I will say it does seem to me like there's issues with what they're trying to do because look, if somebody's going to go into a place with a gun and shoot somebody, right? That's what you're trying to stop. Well, going into a place with a gun and shooting somebody is illegal anyway. So I'm not really sure that banning, like what a waste. All you're doing is just pushing back on the Second Amendment. Really,
And
I mean, in my
only
opinion,
the crooks in the bars will have the guns.
Exactly, and like if you're,
Right.
it kind of goes back to the same argument. That's always that argument with firearms is like criminals are always going to be criminals. So you're not going to legislate them out of breaking the law. That is the law, you know. It's
Right.
silly.
Right. So for those of you who don't know, this week has been a break. It's the town meeting break for the legislature.
Yeah.
So Paul and I have had actually a rather blissful week of not having to run down to the legislature, write up the stories, get down to the building, do our thing down there, come back and write some more, which is sort of a normal day
Sure.
for us. But it's been just, gee, what can we write about? And just doing a lot of other things too. But because it was town meeting, a couple other things happened at town meeting. There was a resolution put forth by the Vermonters for a Free Palestine or something like that, condemning the state of Israel as a quote-unquote apartheid state, which to me is just nuts. And when I think of these pro-Palestinian, the activists, I should say, they were a part of the July 4 parade in Montpelier last year, and I saw them walking by, and they weren't goose-stepping, but my gosh, they might as well have been. They were so loud and just sort of like chanting and like kind of had this vibe of aggression on them that I really had this feeling like, boy, am I back in the 30s here, watching some sort of anti-Semitic Nazi procession here. And they would say, oh, no, we're not anti-Semitic, we're just anti-Zionist. But it does seem to me that one does tend to kind of bleed over into the other.
I want to make a point on that because I'll tell you this, what I saw last weekend with these protesters changed my opinion on that specifically as well.
Okay.
Now, I do believe that there are issues that are beyond, my little comprehension here in Vermont.
Yeah,
between
me too.
Israel
Yeah.
and Palestine. I mean, I will say though, some of my ancestors were in that area, and there's a reason why they left because it's been like this for a very long time. But I've always kind of had a little bit of a, like anti-Zionist sentiment, right? I kind of feel similarly. I think that Israel has a lot of influence in American politics, and there's questions as to why, and we can talk about all that. That's a whole. Maybe we should be asking more questions about that, and I think people are starting to. But the threat, even RFK put up this thing about anti-Semitism on his page and how it's kind of similar to it's like a mental health thing almost. It's almost it's a pervasive hatred that exists.
Wow.
That kind of really eats at your ability to think logically. Now look, I know that a lot of people think, okay, there's a lot of people that happen to be Jewish and are in powerful positions, and there's some truth to that. But there seems to be this hate that is seemingly okay, right? If you're on the left side, right? So the hate that I witnessed just for wearing a hat, right? If they really do feel that way towards Jewish people, and there's a lot of Jews for Trump, by the way, which always makes me laugh. They call Trump a Nazi, right? And then they call him a Russian sympathizer. And it's like, if you know anything about history, you know that doesn't make any sense, right? So which is it, right? He's always the villain. That's always the case. But it really. I always kind of felt like okay, yeah, we need the protests anti-Israel. I kind of agreed with, but now I'm starting to see that let's just put it this way: if a lot of these Palestinians met these college protesters, they would laugh in their face, right? Yeah. It's not a genuine thing. It's just a more of a hey, this is what the popular thing is happening on campus today. This is our Vietnam, so let's go do the thing, So I've had a little bit of a wake-up call with that, where it's wait a minute, there's real hate out there, and they're violent. It seems that way anyway.
Wow. The other thing that happened at town meeting was last year, a third of the towns turned down their school budgets, rejected their school budgets. This year, 9.
Wow.
So we did not see a resurgence of tax revolt, property tax revolt. And I think there's a couple of reasons for that. First of all, Mike Belowski wrote a terrific story in today's Chronicle. He described that the 9 that did turn down their budgets, all of them had large increases, whereas most school districts were really kind of trying to keep it simple, keep it plain. Maybe not all, but just about all of them had really big increases. The way last year there were big increases. So that could be one reason why.
Interesting, though, either way. I believe Northfield's budget did not pass.
Payne Mountain, which I think is sort of part of Northfield,
yeah,
did not.
That is.
It was one of them.
Yeah. I'm pretty sure that it didn't. And I may
right.
have some inside information on some disgruntled officials, which I'm not going to speak more to. But
That's
I've
right, there was some concern there, wasn't there?
I've heard a little bit about it, but we're not going
Right.
to go there yet because I get
Yeah.
a little careful when it's that close to home. But
So the reason why the school taxes are not really high this year is the governor said, you know what, I'm going to take some reserve rainy day money here, set aside, and right proactively, we're going to apply it to next year's property taxes. So we're going to have very little property tax increase. So the voters went, okay, what's not to like? But he also said, he's been saying ever since, we cannot keep doing this. We need to have something in place, preferably by the end of the year, where we know that in 2 years, 4 years, this incredibly huge ocean liner of this Vermont ship of education slowly gets turned around. Because if it doesn't, it's Titanic time again.
yeah, no, it's like that phrase they keep using. It's just like, yeah, exactly. Moving the chairs around on the
Yeah,
on the
it's a lot
Titanic.
like
It's
that.
shuffling the chairs. It's going down anyway, so
Right.
maybe we should figure something out. It's gonna happen. Well, Guy, to that point, I just see this in so many different aspects of our society right now.
Yeah.
Like Ukraine, right? For example, it's reached a pivotal moment. Either it can't go on any further, or
Right.
something else has got to happen bigger
Right.
than we want. And I see that there. I see that happening in these cuts, right, throughout the federal government, and Canada. What's happening with Canada? Like the way things have been, we can't continue that
Right.
way. It's not working.
And we've got a disruptor who's saying, you're right, it can't continue. I'm going to change it. And
Yeah.
will the changes be, worse than the status quo? Some people think so, and others think no, it's a good idea.
And we're gonna
So
find out.
why don't we go to, I think, our last
Yep.
ad?
Last ad here. Today's episode is also brought to you by Perro's Gun Shop. Discover Perro's, Vermont's premier firearms destination nestled in Waterbury. Explore an unparalleled selection of firearms complemented by their exclusive indoor firearm range, the one of its only kind in Vermont. Elevate your skills with their comprehensive professional training classes tailored to every level of expertise. At Perro's, they are dedicated to providing exceptional service and expertise for all of your firearms needs. So how about that for an ad today talking about changing of gun laws?
All right. So next week, Friday at 4, I'm sure we'll be talking about some of the rallies taking place, not only the Clean Eat Standard rally, but a Convention of States rally
right.
Friday morning
Saw that too.
on term limits. That will be happening. And I'm sure there'll be plenty of legislative news to report, and who knows what's going to happen with Doge and the feds and everything. So, but we'll be here to talk about it and to take your comments as well. So, Paul, thank you. Another good show, and why don't you bring us out?
Sure. Thanks everyone for tuning in. We're going to shut it down.